Hi, welcome to this Core Animator tutorial. In this one we're going to be talking about this project done by my very talented photographer friend Brandon Burke. We've taken this image and we've added some animation to it. So we have some ambient motion going on where there's some separation between the main character and the background. We've got the lantern swinging, got some mist and some breath and some weeds in the wind and his hat in the wind. So this tutorial is going to be a little different. It's not going to be very clean. I might ramble a little bit, but the intent is I'm going to try and recreate this and leave in all the mistakes so that it might help you if you run into kind of the same problems as you're doing your own images. So let's go ahead and start a new project and import that image and have that in favorites. So usually I would just import as is, even if I'm going to cut out stuff. I import the entire image because I can always swipe here and extract trimmings from it. The first thing I check when I import an image is kind of how big it is. And Core Animator will let you import images up to 3,000 pixels, I think, and then after that it will start downscaling them a little bit. But kind of think about your target size, what you're going to be wanting to target. I'm going to be targeting a 1080 video, so this will be fine. We'll leave this image at 100%, and yeah, you also want to check, I guess that's a 720 video, that's alright. You also want to check if your image is scaled when it's imported, because if it is large it might scale it just for your convenience to be able to see it all on the screen at the same time. So let's go ahead and set up our canvas and our image about like that. So give us some headroom so that we can kind of separate our subject from the background. Let's go ahead and swipe and extract trimmed image and go in and use our image cutter. It's a good idea to kind of lift off every once in a while and get this spinner, because every time you do, you get an undo point that you can go back to if you mess up. I'm just going to go kind of quickly. Depending on what your final result is, what your intention is, if you're just making kind of an ambient slight animation to post in like a social media feed so that your photography has a little bit of motion, a little bit of interest that might, you know, spark some interest, then you're usually okay to kind of be a little bit quick with this. It will kind of hide the flaws, especially in something with like a complex background like this. So don't be too obsessive with your cutout, I guess. And there we go. So now I have my character separated from the background. I'm going to leave him right there where he was. But I want to articulate more joints, obviously, and cut out the lantern and maybe the hat and other things. So let's go ahead and first I'm going to just kind of put the anchor point in the middle and scale him up just a little bit so that maybe he covers him, you know, covers his the background a little bit where he's going to be. Now let's go ahead and swipe that extraction, and now we can start cutting out pieces off of that we want. So in actuality, we're not going to use this full piece other than to clip out all of our other clippings, since we already have, you know, most of the edges clipped out. So all I'm going to do is grab that lantern, and I set my anchor points as I go. Usually is helpful. I'm going to swipe him again. I'm going to use our base here. I'm going to cut out the hat. Can have that blowing in the wind. That's probably a good anchor point for that. Swipe it again. And I think I articulated his arm a little bit more. I think I did. We'll do the elbow joint, and we'll do a shoulder joint. I'm going to imagine that his shoulder goes back there and make sure I get enough so that that elbow can go behind there. I'm actually not going to set that as an anchor point. But now I'm realizing I'm going to need a face to go in front of that. So let's extract the face. Just kind of. That'll do. Oops, finish that. Okay. So let's start with that for now. And a lot of. Oh, let's see. One more thing. So I actually want to cut this out one more time. And everything that is already cut out, I want to exclude. Let's see. So I've cut out, I've cut out his head, his hat, and this part. So I'm going to draw to there, and then I just want this piece, oops, where none of that is included. And then I'm actually going to move that full trimming to the bottom. Now I've got all my other pieces here. I'm going to just hit the multi-select, select all those, and group them together. And I might call this Mountain Man or something like that. So there's my character with the pieces articulated. Let's see, so there's kind of two ways you can group things. So if you know that this hat is always going to be in front of the head, but I kind of want them to work together, I can just hover over that and it will enter it kind of nests it. And you'll notice that the hat looks like it's below that, but when you nest something, the nested object is always in front, which is kind of counterintuitive. So a lot of times I just like to stick with grouping because it seems to make more sense. So let's group our lantern and the hand and the arm. So I would name that entire group shoulder. Okay. And then I've got the elbow and the lantern. Oops, need to be in another group. And I'll name that by the joint that I can use to move around. So I'll name that one elbow. I'll move that there. You can kind of test this. You don't have much leeway behind you. I'm actually going to try and grow this whole thing just a little bit, just a teeny bit, so that we have some more coverage of that item in the back. Okay, and now we have the lantern, we've got our hat, and we've got our entire character, and I think we're good to go. You can also tap in this, double tap in this gray space, and it will zoom your canvas to fit. So I'm going to take that whole image, or that whole puppet now, that articulated puppet. I'm going to make the anchor point down here near his feet. And I'm also going to set the anchor point of the background image. Whoops, wrong thing to grab. Let's try that again. The background image, grab that anchor point and move that in about the same place. I'm going to try and get. And that way when I scale both of them together, I can kind of count on it covering that same place. kind of hard to explain, but it's one way you can do it. Alright, so let's go in here. Maybe we'll just start with the offset of the background and our character. So I know that pretty much all these animations are going to be really slight and really smooth. So I'll choose in out, go to 2 seconds to make this kind of a slow, smooth animation. I'll grab my scale and I will scale down the background a little bit. And the same 2 seconds I will scale down the character a little bit more. So let's see how that works. Actually, I'll scale down my background and I will scale up my character and move him, still cover his background. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks nice. So a lot of this is just trial and error and seeing what kind of looks nice. And then I'll just auto reverse those loops, see how that starts to look. Something's not quite right. What do I want? Let's just exaggerate it and see what we get. So if I scale him way up, move him around, what does that do? Okay, that's the right direction. It's just a little too much. Sometimes it's easier to do that. Okay. That's good. We just have a little bit of separation, kind of create some interest. Tap away. Oh. 2-finger tap to undo. Okay. Alrighty, so now let's go in and start rotating our lantern, and maybe we'll make that a little bit faster. And scale is not what I want rotation. See how much, no, let's go to 1 second. Pretty close. It's not quite covering everything. So if I go back to layout and increase the size and change the position of my lantern in layout, then that will not have to worry about that won't set any keyframes. That'll just be kind of my global change to the lantern. I know at 2 seconds I want it to be kind of over there. Let's see. All right, let's rotate his shoulder and his elbow. I'm just being really slow about this, and all right, that's all right. So we'll call that good for now. Let's do his hat. His hat blowing in the wind. So that's actually pretty easy. We select his hat. We hit our live record button. Hit rotation. We can kind of just make a natural kind of organic movement. See how that looks. That looks pretty good. We'll just loop that. The only problem would be if that last value is really far, then we'll get a jump with the loop, but in this case it's probably fine. So Okay, so now let's do some lighting effects with the mist and other things. So I know I'm going to need some more. If I cut that out, I'm not going to get exactly what I want. So I'm actually just going to do a Google image search and grab some items using Google image search and search for transparent items only. And I'll grab this light beam. Since this is such a minor part of the composition, just kind of adds a little flair to it. Alright, so we'll get that in the position we want with the anchor point, the opacity, and the scale. And we probably want that to stay in the Mountain Man layer group so that when it scales everything, actually more than that, we want it to be in the lantern group. We can just nest that. Now let's see what that's going to look like. Looks great. So that'll be simple to animate. So that already is moving because the lantern is moving and it's nested in that group. So we could probably leave it at that. If we want to make it go just a little bit further than normal, you can go to 1 second where the lantern is moved that way, and we can rotate just a little additional amount. Okay, that looks great. It looks like looks like all my durations are a little shorter than my other example, but that's okay. Let's go grab some mist. Pop it in there as is. I kind of want this mist to just kind of be in that same group. Really kind of light. Let's go ahead and duplicate it a couple of times. Get some different variations in size. And probably, let's see, vary the opacity a bit. I'm going to move those mists as a group themselves, so let's select those all and group them together. So now we've got this mist. Okay, let's go animate those. I just want them to kind of drift forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag their opacity up at 0 and go ahead and stamp the keyframe for their position. And those are the two attributes I'm going to animate. So every 2 seconds we're going to move just this way. And we'll fade all the way out. That way we can just loop and go back to the beginning without, since it fades all the way to 0. Oh, so that won't work. So we probably need to buy ourselves some more time. So let's stretch that out a bit. What we need is to move, so that's 100%. So let's define 0. So we kind of have it come on and off. That'll work. That looks great. And if you wanted to add a little more variation to that, we could, maybe let's just take this middle one and let's have it kind of bob up and down. Oh, that's way too fast. You probably won't even notice that change. All right, that's fine. Looks great. Let's go ahead and grab our glow. So let's do a search for glow ball. Transparent stuff. And that should work. throw that in. We want that to be in the lantern nest, but we want it to be, sometimes it's a little fickle getting where it wants to be. Yeah, so that just needed to refresh. So it is in there. It's in the lantern nest, but underneath. Underneath the mist and the light beam. It's probably way too opaque, so let's turn it down. It's not quite in the right spot. That looks pretty good for a starting position. We'll just have that kind of grow. And that's probably all we need to do. We may change its opacity a little bit. Actually, I think it's maybe a bit bright, so maybe we'll have it come down in opacity. And maybe that's not quite fast enough. Yeah, that looks good. One thing I forgot, let's grab another one of these mists. And this one I'm going to use, where is it? Right there. This one I'm going to use for his breath. So I'll set this one up slightly different. So I have an anchor point right there. And we're going to start from basically, we'll start in layout mode, we'll have it opacity off and have it real small. And then we'll go to 2 seconds and we'll animate that coming on to full opacity, much larger, going upwards, kind of floating upwards. And so our Y, let's have that ease in, so it's kind of ramping up. Actually, other way. I want it to start out fast and then kind of slow down. Probably same with the scale. And then I know that my opacity is not going to quite be what I want, because I want it to come on a little faster and then fade back out by that time. So we'll do all that. Oh, let's loop everything. Just standard loop this time, not auto reverse. We notice that it's a little too high, or when it appears, and it looks good, but the opacity or the position's a little off. Instead of messing around in here, what we can do is go back to layout and change its initial position to just a little bit lower, and that will fix our problem. So that looks good. Not much else to do here. We've got, I guess we animated those weeds, so that's pretty easy. We can just extract the trimming from the background. If you just kind of grab something really small, this is always a kind of a nice effect on your photos. Just kind of an easy way to grab something really small and show the wind. And now that needs to move with the background image. So again, I'm going to just nest it inside of that. And I'm going to grab 2 of them at least, just so that they kind of interact with each other. Makes it more interesting. And that should be really easy to animate. Probably pretty quick duration. Let's do 0.5 seconds. And I want to offset the duration so that they kind of interact. And then I also want them to maybe scale. Just scale on the Y. And then I'm going to drag that so that that's offset from the other. And that's a little too intense, so which one's intense? Huh? That seemed to work. I think my scale is a little too strong on both of those, but that's okay. So, well, what you could do is, if you really want to change it, you can select your item from even the timeline. And you can see that it should have been 50-50, now it's 66, so we can enter in more, something like 58 or something like that. And that will tone that scale down quite a bit. I think that looks great. So let's preview. We've got our hat, we've got our mist, we've got our glow, we've got our kind of wind and our separation. So that's that. It's pretty easy to do. And the last thing you note is that in the export panel, we can target probably 720 is as big as you're going to get. It lets you choose this, but it wouldn't actually be any better quality probably, or maybe just slightly. So it tells us we have a 4-second looping video, and we have a problem because some of our loops are not offset correctly. So you could come back in here and kind of think about, well, what's kind of the problem? So we saw that mist was part of the problem, at least. And we have that coming in every 2 seconds. So one thing you can do if you just want a longer loop is maybe let's go out to something like 14 seconds, and this is our throwaway image, but we'll just stamp a keyframe there at 14 seconds, and that will force the export pane to treat it like a 14-second clip. And really the right thing to do is to figure out exactly where everything will loop perfectly. But if you give it about 14 seconds, or your loops, see, that's kind of a harsh edge there. So a little bit of trial and error there. If you're really smart with math, you can look at all your loops and figure out when they're all looped together. Remember that auto reverse loops actually will loop at twice their value. So that would be at 4 seconds, and then so we've got some conflict here. So maybe, well, let's try 6 seconds. I guess I can just look through here and see. It looks like that might be right on. That looks like the beginning, so let's try 6 seconds. No, not quite. Anyway, there's a little bit of trial and error there. But hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can take a single image, cut it up, kind of keep it. You don't have to do too much. You just cut it up and kind of keep it in front, and then you can move things slightly behind, and you get a really nice effect. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Thanks for watching.